Right, from now on, I'm going to speak in my very best Scottish Standard English, which is very different from the dialect of Ayrshire Scots that I speak. So, Scottish Standard English is a world, part of the world family of English. You could compare it to American English or Canadian English or Australian English. It has a number of features associated with it which are peculiar to Scottish Standard English and retains some words that people are unaware that are Scots words and they think are English words. A classic is out with, being out with the town or out with a subject. People presume it's an English word. It's not. It's a survival of a Scots word in Scottish Standard English. And I would use Scottish Standard English in very formal situations when I'm speaking to strangers, when I'm speaking on the phone to people I do not know, or when I'm being interviewed about a subject where the interviewer is asking me the question in Scottish Standard English. I would, like most people, I would switch to Scots in a less formal situation or when I was speaking to people who are close to me, to my family. So in the house, in my home, although my wife is Portuguese, she's been listening to me speaking Scots for decades, so she understands all the Scots, and I speak Scots at home. And maybe I'm more aware than most people about when one language starts and when another one begins. And most people are constantly going back and forward between Scottish Standard English and Scots. And both languages infiltrate each other. It was interesting. I had a period when I went to university where I wasn't sure if I would be able to contribute to a discussion in a tutorial and sustain what I said in Scottish Standard English without my Scots coming into it. There's a Scots expression, putting your foot in it, putting your foot in it, where you're speaking English and a Scots word invades and changes the English. Well, I was very aware of that, and read a lot of English novels using classical English. But once I mastered that language and was able to be confident in my ability to communicate to my university professors and tutorial students, then I was quite happy then to revert to Scots and to use my Scots. So I never left my Scots behind. Some people speak Scots when they are children, lose it when they are trying to get a foothold in getting on in life because they perceive the speaking Scots will hinder that economic success. And then when they have that economic success in later life, they resort or regress back to Scots. I'm very different in that I have never not spoken Scots. It's continued with me, even when I was at the height of my economic progress. It's always been part of my identity. And I thank my parents for that. They gave me a strong identity with Scots, my mother, and I dedicate Scots and Mither Tongue to my mother because she was one of the main influences in giving me a good Scots tongue. Well, ironically, the status of Scots is better now than it was when I was growing up and even when I was a young man, because it's been given more place in our public life. I mean, I was invited to address the Scottish Parliament in Scots, and that will have been the first time that happened since 1707, since the union with England. So in some ways it's better, but the vocabulary, for example, the distinctive Scots words that I used and my parents used have been eroded. Less of that is being used. So what you have now, especially in the urban areas, you have people with the structure of the dialect still intact, but a lot of the distinctive words are no longer used. So it is there, but in a way, it's a ghost of what it was. But these young people don't have the same linguistic hang-ups that perhaps the older generation had, who were told it was slang, who were told it was uncouth. They're more confident in the way they speak, but the way they speak is not as rich as the way I spoke growing up 60 years ago. So there's a dichotomy there, if you like. Some ways, officially, it has more recognition now, but nothing like Catalan and Catalonia. We don't have radio stations, we don't have television stations, we have the occasional documentary, and that's it. So we are very poor in some aspects of our linguistic culture, and yet people still write it, people still create in it, and people still speak it. So it's a mixed situation today, I would say. It's for the reasons that I've been saying up till now. It just the extension of the linguistic rights of Scots speakers hasn't gone nearly far enough as it has with Gaelic. Most of the people who make decisions about language are monoglot English speakers. That's the fundamental thing. They don't have they don't have a knowledge of language. And monoglot English speakers tend to think, if I can vaguely understand or tune into something, it cannot be a language. In other words, they don't know about the links between Catalan and French, or Catalan and Castellano, and the links between Gallego and Castellano and Portuguese. They have no idea that languages can have a core shared vocabulary, but enough of a difference to make it a separate language. And that's the case with most people who are working in the field of culture in Scotland. The vast majority are monoglot English speakers. They know what Gaelic is because they say they can't understand it. They know it's a language. But when they hear somebody say, I get down the stairs and I get home, or they hear something and they were brought up with it, and they just think, oh, that's just a variation, that's no anything special. They don't realise the remnant of that's spoken in urban areas today is the remnant of something powerful and national and international going back centuries. Those people don't know that, therefore they resist giving recognition to Scots. It would require funding. It would require money for the experts to get together and create the suggestions for a standard Scots. And I think people would gradually use it. I mean, I use quite a classical standard Scots when I write Scots. I use forms that I've got go back centuries. But I'm educated in the language. I'm educated in the literature. Very few people are. So yes, it does need that, but it would need to be able to cope with different forms that would be part of the standard, that would reflect the different dialects. I was at a conference yesterday, and a good example is Nynorsk, the language of Norway, where they have Bokmal, which is closer to Danish, which was the main language for centuries in Norway, closer to a standard Danish language. And then they have Landsmål, or Nynorsk, New Norse, and it is based on the spoken dialects of the country historically, but they're both given equal status. And even in Nynorsk, there's an allowance for people to write and down variations depending on where they come from. So it would need to be a flexible thing like that. But yes, we do need standardization, like every other language.